Embassy of the Dead. Chapter 11. The Book of the Dead. Penny scowled. I thought I told you never to set foot in my house again, but here you are, poisoning the air like a sailor's fart.
Stiffkey's long face took on a disapproving expression. Now, Penny, ain't no point in vulgarity. Don't help no one.
She looked at Jake. What kind of trouble has this old fool got you into?
Stiffkey ignored her and approached the table. Has the embassy given you back your licence yet? He sounded hopeful.
Penny cackled. Oh, wouldn't that make you feel better, Albert? That even though you ruined everything, just when I was at the height of my career, at least I can still undo ghosts in my golden years. She glared at Stiffkey. I can't even make a cup of tea without needing a rest. She sat down again, her voice softening. Take a look around, Albert. Does it look like I'm still earning an undoer's wage? So there's your answer. They have not given me my licence back.
I'm sorry, Penny, said Stiffkey sadly. Really I am. There's none more sorry than me. I wanted it more than anyone. I just don't know what's keeping me here in this wretched earthly plane with all you living folk and all your living ways. He fiddled with the rim of his hat. I tried my best to be undone.
There was that word again. Undone. Undo. Undoer. Jake had had enough of listening and not understanding. Will someone please tell me what undoing is? Asked Jake firmly. Bad Penny looked at Stiffkey, who shrugged his bony shoulders, dropping some dirt from his collar as he did. Go on, tell him. The boy knows far too much of what he shouldn't, and he can't be in more trouble than he already is. He looked down at Penny, and the silence seemed to stretch between them until she sighed and turned her attention back to Jake. A spirit becomes trapped on the earthly plane due to an unresolved trauma during life or death. She nodded to Stiffkey. You know why he's a ghost, don't you?
That's enough, Stiffkey sputtered. Always digging for worms you are, like an old crow on a fresh grave.
They were back to arguing then. It reminded Jake of his parents before they'd split up. Bad Penny cackled again. Such a dignified and serious man is our Stiffkey. Not always, though, much to his misfortune. She leaned towards Jake conspiratorially. The old fool slipped into a grave at a funeral he was undertaking. It was raining, you see. Snapped his neck. Stiffkey stood up and loomed over Penny.
I forbid you to talk about it. It don't do discussing the misfortunes of others in such a way.
Bad Penny whispered to Jake, loud enough for Stiffkey to hear. If you look close, you'll see the slight crick where the bones aren't set straight. Jake automatically looked at Stiffkey's neck, then turned away again when he caught the thunderous look in the ghost's eyes. Penny was enjoying herself now. She carried on. First thing he saw as a ghost was the horrified face of the vicar and the dead man's family peering down at his body lying on top of a broken coffin. She breathed in through her nose and shook her head. Worst thing an undertaker can do is spoil a funeral. Isn't that right, Stiffkey? Stiffkey grunted, his furious face staring down at the floor. Penny looked at him a moment and then seemed to soften. She indicated for Stiffkey to sit at the table, which he did begrudgingly. She poured out the tea, topping hers up from a small flask she retrieved from under her dressing-gown pocket. An undoer, started Penny, is someone who helps a ghost come to terms with their trauma, to understand why they're trapped on the earthly plane. They solve the mystery, and that undoes the ghost's problems. It cleanses their spirit and allows them to pass on to the afterworld. Letting in resentful ghosts, or guilty ones, or furiously angry ones for that matter, would not make for a happy, peaceful afterworld. Before they pass on, they must deal with their issues, leave them at the gates, so to speak, and then they're free to die happily ever after. Penny took a long swig of tea and then cupped her hands around the mug. And that's what I was, an undoer, a member of the living, licensed by the Embassy of the Dead to help ghosts pass on to the afterworld. The living are the best at undoing because other ghosts' energies can confuse things. It's much harder to undo one ghost in the presence of another. I always like to do the final act of undoing alone. Still, we living need help. Somebody who knows the business of the dead and knows what it's like to be stuck. That's why every undoer has a ghost assistant.
I was not your assistant,
grumbled Stiffkey. Jake could feel the tension rising again, so he jumped in before it got out of hand. So an undoer is like a brilliant detective with an amazing ghost partner, like in the movies. Yes, exactly, said Penny, looking pleased with that description. I was an ace detective in my day. They didn't call me Bad Penny for nothing. Bad means good, by the way, she explained to Jake.
That ain't why they called her Bad Penny, Stiffkey muttered. She went sour a long time ago.
Penny didn't seem to hear, or at least pretended not to. Together we undid over 100 ghosts. We were awarded the Order of the Dead Medal. Only 4 other undoers and their partners, she rolled her eyes, have ever managed that. We were set to break the record when... She took a deep breath and glanced at Stiffkey, who finished her sentence.
When I asked to be undone, I'd already been dead for over 200 years and I was tired of the longings. We had a great run, hadn't we, Pen?
He smiled at her across the table.
Receiving the medal with you by my side was one of the proudest moments of my career. But I just felt it was my time and I wanted to see...
He trailed off. Of course I agreed to help, said Penny. Stiffkey was my best friend. Penny smiled, the saddest smile Jake had ever seen. Even though it would mean I'd have to carry on undoing without him, find a new partner, I understood. I wanted him to be happy. Stiffkey and Penny held each other's gaze before Penny carried on. It should have been easy. We were the greatest undoers of our day, and we knew each other as well as any friends ever did. You see, ghosts never know for certain the reason for their hauntings, but with Stiffkey it was obvious. He'd ruined the funeral of another, and he needed to make amends. We tried everything, tracing the descendants of the poor man whose coffin he'd smashed, helping out at funerals where the deceased couldn't afford a dignified send-off. We even reburied 2 people whose bodies had been mixed up at the undertaker's. Bad Penny frowned and stared into her tea, as though remembering the past. But nothing worked, and in the end we had to give up. It was never the same after that, not for either of us. We just couldn't undo any more, not even the easiest cases. Eventually the embassy issued us with a deadline, and when it passed, they declared me unfit to be an undoer and struck me off. Now I'm old and broke, and still this sanctimonious toad wants to haunt me. She looked at Stiffkey as she spoke, but the menace had gone out of her voice. Stiffkey hung his head.
I couldn't bear to see Penny hurting and know it was my fault, so I decided to retire and just wait out the longings away from other people and ghosts, until now that we're asking for your help.
Penny shrugged a little resentfully. Well, Albert, I just don't know. I don't see you for nearly 20 years, and now you want my help? Just because you've got some young innocent into trouble? I dread to think what you've done now.
It ain't my fault the child's sensitive, snapped Stiffkey. And besides, you told me never to come back.
And they were off again. Jake sighed, stood up and walked into the grimy kitchen. They didn't seem to notice him leave. They were too busy arguing. Jake heard the odd word being yelled.
Finger! Good morning!
Morkins! Stiffkey was clearly trying to explain what had happened, but there was so much shouting it was hard to follow. It was like being home with Mum and Dad again, and Jake had about enough of that. He peered around the kitchen, looking for a distraction. His eyes wandered to a bookshelf filled with old, food-splattered cookbooks. Then one caught his attention, the only one with an unmarked spine. He reached up and took it from the shelf, turning it over in his hands. This was no cookbook. In silver writing, embossed across a faded green cover, he read the title, The Book of the Dead. There was sudden silence, and then Jake heard steps behind him. He turned round to find Stiffkey and Bad Penny watching him.
"See," said Stiffkey, "I told you he was sensitive. See how he found your book."
He sounded proud. Bad Penny eyed Jake thoughtfully. So I see. She took the book from him and put her arm around his shoulder. Come and sit down, Jake. I think it's time we talked. And that is the end of that chapter. And I have no correspondent to speak to about it because Reuben has taken the dog for a walk. So we'll see you for the next chapter, which is called Whose Finger Is It Anyway?